All right. And hello, everyone. And thank you for joining us for this episode. And this is an exciting episode because we are going to be talking about famous quotes today from Laura Duncan. Quotes that you will see etched in stone someday, somewhere, probably. So I'm going to get right into these, Laura. And the first one is one that you say quite frequently, and it is, what you do matters, but you matter more. So can you just give us a little bit of context for that quote?
Yeah. So a big, part of the compassion method is being able to heal shame. And shame centers around what you do is who you are. And through the compassion method, where I help people, we help people to be able to explore who they are separate from what they do. And so that's a one sentence kind of indicator if you're in shame or if you're connected to your true self. So shame will say, you matter, potentially, you matter, but what you do matters more. When we're connected to our true self, we'll be able to say, what we do matters, but we matter more. And it's a one sentence indicator to see where you're at in that process.
And what I love about going over these quotes is it's a great review. And this really hits on a lot of points that we touched on throughout all of our episodes and throughout the entire compassion method. But one of the follow-up questions I have to you from what you just shared is, why do you think we are so focused on behavior, which is the what you do part?
One of the reasons why what you do is so important is because if you go back to the knowledge of good and evil, that was the center of how we function. Both if you are a Christian or in the religious world, you'll function on behavior being super important. And then also, even if you're not in the religious capacity, you're also going to focus on behavior because behavior brings connection. It's not meant to, but from a young age, most parenting revolves around teaching kids how to have good behavior. Unintentionally, usually, parents are saying, when you're good, you get connection. And when you're bad, you get disconnection. So for our whole entire lives, we're in this frantic place of trying to be good enough in order to be able to have connection, to know that we matter, that we're valuable, that we're worthy. And so then behavior starts to become the measurement of how loved we're going to be or how unloved we're going to be.
So you're probably not a really big fan of the traditional timeout.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I mean, I think sometimes we need space to think about, what we're going through and what's really going on in our heart. So sometimes I'll do kind of like an untraditional timeout of like, why don't you take a moment, not to think about what you did, but think about what's going on in your heart that caused you to do what you did. There's a big difference because our behaviors are usually centered around reaction to a wound or to pain. So we can see it really clearly. Like if you see like a child that's very hungry or overtired, they're going to have big emotions and big reactions because there's a issue going on that's causing it. And it's the same thing for emotions. If we have sadness or if we're scared or if we're feeling alone, we're going to have a big reaction and we're going to potentially do behaviors that are wrong because we're reacting from that pain.
So in many ways, the thing that a person needs the most when they're struggling, or a child, just thinking in terms of a child is easy because we can all kind of picture this.
Exactly. So but we definitely do this as adults.
As adults too, absolutely. Yeah. So thinking of a child that's having an emotional breakdown or whatever, the thing that they actually need the most, we do not give them by sending them off on a timeout. What they really need is for us to hang in there with them.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. For us to face our own triggers, because that's what's happening with parents. They're triggered by bad behavior because they feel shame that they're a bad parent, that they're raising a bad kid. And so they want the child to stop having the bad behavior so that they can be a good parent again. So the parent has to take care of their own trigger. But then this is the beautiful thing. If you've taken care of your trigger as a parent, then you can come close to your child. You can be with them in their fit. You can be with them in their bad behavior because we know the bad behavior is coming from a wound that we want to be able to be with them. So they're not really throwing a fit. They're really scared. So now we can come close and be with them and they're scared, help teach them, help be with them, help bring comfort and compassion to them in that moment, because that's what they need to actually change their behavior, not primarily discipline.
We talk about this in terms of toddlers, but you've talked about how like the teenage years are going through your toddler years again.
Yep.
Kind of like getting what they didn't get when they're toddlers.
And developmentally, it has really strong correlation between toddlers and teenagers.
So when a toddler's throwing a fit, there's even elements of it that can be cute. It's not as, it can be bad. Don't get me wrong. I've had toddlers, I've had teenagers, I have had the whole spectrum. But when it's teenagers, it looks particularly unsightful. And I think that as a parent, I know that there's been times where I've been like, the timeout concept or go to your room or whatever. It's been totally because I couldn't handle it. And you kind of fool yourself saying, oh, you're doing this because this is what discipline looks like. But really you're doing it because you just can't handle the messiness of this right now. So
exactly. And kind of how I approach it is, so what the child's doing matters. If they're, being disrespectful, if they're being disobedient, if they're doing things that are hurtful to themselves or to others, what they do matters, but they matter more. So what that means is I'm going to come close to who they are in that moment, and we're going to take care of their behavior second. But a triggered parent is always going to take care of behavior first and usually not even get to connecting to the child after, because once the behavior has been modified, the parent usually moves on.
Yep. Sigh of relief, move on.
Okay, they're being good now, we can move on, instead of actually coming close and saying, what's really going on? Why did that really bother you? And being able to get to the roots that are causing the behavior in the first place.
I think for a lot of people, this quote is very triggering in and of itself because they feel like you're condoning bad behavior, but that is absolutely not what you're doing. And I feel also that what you're doing is very, very spiritual, really, because to me, the overwhelming message of the cross is this: what you do matters, but you matter more, because God didn't wait for us to get our crap together before he died for us. While we were still sinners, he did. And I think that's really profound when you think about it, that he was able to see past all of this bad behavior, see us for who we are, so much so that he was willing to die.
Yeah. And I really believe that if we go back to the same child analogy, if we're able to see our child for who they are, or see any person for who they are, see ourselves for who we are, then we're able to actually help them make decisions, have a perspective from that place of who they really are. Because ultimately what we're saying when we say that you matter, but your behavior matters more, that your behavior is who you are. So now they're always trying to get out of the deficit of bad behavior to get to a place of good standing. But if they already are who they were created to be, their true self, then they're working from identity, not to identity. And it's a powerful place for a child, teenager, adult to be able to change behavior from who they are versus change behavior to have connection and relationship with a parent or others.
Really, you're just talking about changing behavior to who they are, just realigning themselves to their true self, like them coming to the revelation that this isn't me. This is not how I act. This is not how I was created.
And that's such a beautiful thing, that a gift a parent can give. We can give that to other people by being able to say, even if your behavior is not lining up with who you are, I still see who you are. And we have such a privilege as parents because we've seen our child from day one. We know who they are. We know them so well that we get the privilege of standing in the gap when they're not able to do that for themselves.
And what you're saying really is, I think a lot of times when we're with someone that's not acting appropriately or acting like themselves, they're triggered, all the focus goes on them, but really as much of that responsibility is on us, so that we can hang in there, stay with ourselves, so we don't trigger off of their trigger, hang with ourselves, so that we can, like you've talked about before, lend them our adult brain.
Exactly. And that's so needed, whether it's a child or even another adult that's in their child brain versus their adult brain.
And this happens to adults just as much as children.
It does. It's easy to use the kid example because we have more of an open mind to that because it seems more obvious. But if you look around, adults are acting pretty much exactly the same as children, especially in this time of our lives where there's so much going on.
Yeah, there's so much going on. And never before in human history has people been able to air their triggered selves as easily.
I know, that's
and for
true.
As many people to see their triggered selves on display.
That's so true.
It is like, thankfully you can go back and like delete some of those things, but if it's on the internet, it's there forever somewhere. Somewhere. All right. So we could definitely talk about this quote. I'm sure for an entire session, but we're not going to. We're going to move on to the next one because we want to hit snippets here. So your second one that I have down is your voice is first for yourself and then for others.
Yeah, it's kind of like the chicken and the egg, what comes first. And so in the 10 gifts, one of the gifts is to be heard. You need your mom and your dad, 0 to 12 years old, to be able to hear you. And when a parent hears you, then you're able to actually have a voice. A lot of people, it's kind of trendy to be trying to find your voice, especially if you felt like a doormat or you felt like you didn't know how to stand up for things. Again, right now with what's going on in our lives, there's a lot of people trying to find their voice with what's going on. But your voice actually comes first from being heard. So first we're heard, then we have a voice, because a parent hearing you draws your voice out. So now we have a voice. And then most people think that voice is now to go and to tell people what's wrong or what we need to stand up for or what we need to come against. But your voice is first to be a voice piece for your heart. You're able to actually be able to say what's in your heart to another person when you're able to use your voice to be able to communicate. And if that person is able to receive the invitation that comes with having a voice, then we have connection. But even if that person's not able to be able to receive what you have to say, receive your voice, you didn't do it for them first. You did it for your heart first. And so you can be proud, you can be at peace because you said what you needed to say for yourself first and for the other person second. And one of the reasons why that's so key is because most people are manipulating with their voice, usually unintentionally. They're manipulating with their voice because they believe their voice is to get the other person to do or not do what they want them to do. And that ends up being manipulation because it's saying, I'm not okay within myself. I need to voice my whatever I need to say in order for you to do something to make me okay.
I need them to act a certain way or to apologize or
exactly, or to say this is right or say they're wrong. That's usually what people are looking. Yep. If we have agreement, then we're okay, because I use my voice to have agreement, but our voice is to be a voice piece for our heart because our heart can't say what it needs to say unless we use our voice to communicate that.
Well, and how many times we end up regretting what we say because it's coming from our pain, not from our true self.
Yeah.
So we didn't take the time with our heart. We didn't bring the comfort. We didn't do that. So we spout something else out that we end up regretting and then feel ashamed of later, and then have to kind of fight that whole cycle. And how much more so if we had taken care of our heart first.
Exactly. And we talk about how we have our triggered self and we have our true self. Whose voice are you using? Are you using your triggered self voice or are you using your true self voice? Because they're going to be two different voices. One's going to respond and one's going to react. And it's really important to distinguish between the two.
Every time I post something on Facebook, I'm trying to start asking myself that question. And I find myself deleting a lot of my posts before I post them. I'm like, it's
a great question to ask. And like I said before, even with the previous quote of, what you do matters, what you say matters, but you matter more. And being able to really recognize where are we speaking from? Because each person on this earth has authority. And that authority is going to come from who you were created to be, from your true self. So do you want your authority, your clarity, your voice to be spoken in a place that's going to be able to be received because it's in a response versus a reaction? Or do we want our voice to be our triggered voice that's going to be self-protecting? It's going to be defensive. It's going to be dominating. And really being able to recognize the tone of each voice.
And a lot of times I think our voice is, we have a need that we're trying to get met. Like you said, we're trying to be heard.
So true.
We're trying to be accepted. We're trying to be, know that we're enough.
I would say that's between pain and our unmet need. That's primarily the reason people are speaking from their triggered self.
Yeah. And that's probably the primary reason they're speaking on social media.
Yeah. I think social media for a lot of people allows them to have a voice where they're too afraid to in person, or they don't know how to in person. So part of me actually likes that people are being able to say what they need to say. It's just, we'd like to refine it to saying it from our true self versus our triggered self.
Yep. And sometimes it's really messy, but sometimes it is better that it comes out versus stays in. When my teenagers are having their moments, I remind myself of that. I would rather be seeing this right now than having this going on inside of them. I'd love to see them be able to bring more comfort to themselves in the midst of that. But I'm just glad that it's out in the open and not hidden, because for me as a kid, it was definitely more hidden. I did not feel comfortable expressing any of that in front of my father particularly, but my mother less so. My mother definitely got more of it than my dad.
And that's what we'll find even as adults when we're practicing our voice and we're practicing being connected to our true selves. You're not going to get it right every time. It's going to be messy. Sometimes there's going to be a mixture of your true voice and your triggered voice. And that's okay, because what we're doing is we're saying, my heart matters so much that I'm willing to be messy. I'm willing to not say it right. I'm willing to keep exploring until I can be able to have my voice be a proper representation of myself.
That's good. All right. So the next question is, self-compassion starts with you and ends with a party. And this was one I really struggled with. I would hear you say that and I would just be like, I don't get it. So it took me a while. And finally, one time I just sat you down and like, what the heck do you mean by this? So I would say I 80% get it now. So go ahead,
Gotcha.
Fire away.
Let me share it one more time. No,
Yeah.
just easy. So a lot of times when I'm teaching people the art of self-compassion, one of their biggest complaints is, I feel like I've been alone in my pain for a lot of my life, especially like you were saying with the last question, if you were raised in an environment where parents wanted you to be quiet, and so your voice got really, suppressed. And so now here we are trying to learn how to bring compassion to ourselves, but we felt alone most of our lives. So self-compassion actually feels like, oh, great, here I have this pain. Now you're telling me I have to be the one to take care of the pain that I've been ultimately feeling like I've been taking care of my whole life. So now I feel like I'm exactly where I was before, but oh, great. Yeah, I can show myself compassion now and I'll be okay. So there's this kind of isolation or this feeling of over responsibility of having to take care of ourselves that we're fed up with and we don't want to keep doing. And so we start feeling resentful towards self-compassion, and we want someone else to come in and give us the compassion that we need. But the tricky thing about that is you can only receive self-compassion or compassion from others if your heart's in a tender place. And self-compassion is what tenderizes our heart for us to be able to receive from others. So what I mean by that quote is, when I start the process of giving myself compassion, and ultimately compassion is just being with ourselves, being with who we are, being with our pain, being with our unmet need, being able to be with ourselves. So when I come and I'm with myself, then I create a tenderness in my heart to be able to receive from God and others. And that's the party I'm talking about. It opens our hearts up to actually be able to receive from multiple different sources of love that 5 minutes before, when we were in a triggered state, without self-compassion, without self-awareness, we weren't able to open up our hearts to receive from others. When somebody comes up and gives you a hug and you're in a bad mood, you want to automatically push them away. But if you were able to give yourself compassion, your heart would be softer. So when that person came up to give you the hug, you'd be able to lean into it. You'd be able to receive from it. So ultimately, what most of us are doing is walking around unable to receive compassion. And compassion is what heals. When someone's with us in our pain, it heals our pain. We're unable to receive that because we have a resistance towards it, because we're in a triggered frame of mind that we're not able to actually be able to receive from others. So self-compassion starts with you, but it ends in a party where others can come be with you as well.
And that resistance is there because
we're in our pain, we're in our wound. So if I'm really scared and I haven't had proper comfort, I'm going to have a resistance. I'm going to have a reaction. We've talked about protectors in previous episodes. Well, I'm going to have my protectors, whatever that might be. And that protector is going to create a wall and a defense towards love. And we think that's why we're getting frustrated sometimes when we're saying, great, now I have to show myself compassion and it feels like I'm all alone again. We feel like this resistance there, but we're actually resistant towards love, towards compassion, because pain pushes love away. And that's why it's so important to bring compassion to our hearts, because it allows us to have the ability to receive love. And when we're in a triggered state, the very thing we need is to receive love and compassion.
It's kind of ironic that when we're hurting, the very thing that we need the most, we push away.
Yeah, like one of the examples I give that's a really good illustration is, a foster child. You think if a foster child got placed in a loving, kind home, safe home, that they would just be like, "Oh, finally, I'm going to be loved." And they would run to the foster parents and they would hug them and they would be hugged and they would live happily ever after. But if anyone has any level of experience or been around any type of fostering, it doesn't look that way. Foster kids come in with their wounds, in pain, with lack of love, lack of compassion. So they come into it. And when love is given to them, they fight against it. They kick, they bite, they scream, they have big reactions because love actually hurts when we're in a painful place. And that's why it's so important to not just give the love, but teach kids that have been hurt, adults that have been hurt, to be able to receive love.
Right. And it hurts, I think, because, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of it would be because they're scared that it's not going to last, or that it's not real, or
they're
it
not
looks kind of real,
Yep.
or all the things.
There's so many different protectors, resistance we have based on our life story. Whatever your caregivers communicated to you is what you're going to carry into a loving relationship, whether that's a foster home or even marriage, having your own family. You're going to carry that same pain into it because it did not get healed. It did not get taken care of. And so we're going to be having that resistance because we haven't actually received what we need. And the doorway to receive what we need is self-compassion.
Yeah. And then once we have the self-compassion, then we can invite others in and we can throw a party.
Yep, exactly. And that's the party. That's the joy that comes and the peace that comes and the celebration that comes, that we're reunited with connection because we're no longer resistant because of our pain.
Now I would say I understand this quote to about 90%. So.
That's good. Good. We're working there.
We're getting there.
I added a couple things this time just to, make it a little bit. That's why it's kind of fun to go over these quotes, is because you can really expand on them.
Well, there's a lot of depth there. There really is. The next question is, or the next quote is, feel your pain, get comfort, go play.
Yeah, I like that one. You like that one too. What do you think about that one?
So I think that play has been something that was very difficult for me. And I felt a lot of shame about not being able to play. So my family and my wife is definitely more on the playful side. So I felt a lot of shame about not being able to participate, and I felt disconnected and all those other things. And now I've realized that, kind of like with the illustration we were sharing before, in my early childhood development, play actually led to disconnection to caregivers and was seen as frivolous and, even almost shameful. Like, you should be working, don't play, you should work. So just having that revelation allowed me to have a lot of compassion on myself that, you know what, I do know how to play, because I can look back at them pictures of that little boy. That little boy knew how to play, and he could play and he could laugh and he could have fun, and he didn't need any artificial substances to pull it off. You could just do it. So this one was really important to me because it's kind of central to my journey of getting back to play, and I'm working my way back. Clawing. Yeah. Sometimes it feels like I'm clawing my way back, but I'm heading in the right trajectory. So to be able to learn to play again. So
no, it's really important. And, knowing your journey, it was hard for you to even recognize what your pain was. It was hard. And then if you can't recognize your pain, if you can't feel it, you can't get comfort. And if you can't get comfort, you can't let go or go play. And so a lot of people, especially adults, are in a vicious cycle of recognizing that they're too serious or plays hard, or they're, just so over responsible. So they're trying to let loose a little bit. And so, like you said, that's a lot of times where like addiction comes in or other things come in because they're not able to just play because of the pain. So they have to have artificial, and that's not just
something
drugs or alcohol, something to numb it. That could even be something really good, something to numb it in order to be able to feel like you can let go and have fun. But that's the kind of fun that ends up feeling kind of empty because you still have your pain. You still aren't comforted.
And you might not feel very good the next morning.
Exactly. That's true too, depending upon your choice of what you're trying to do. So it
kind of feels kind of crappy afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't have that purity that comes from being able to be reconnected with your playful side that got covered up as you became an adult.
And I think as a kid, when you think of this imagery as a kid, a little kid falls down, let's, just picture this imagery, falls down, scrapes his knee, screams, cries, mom, dad comes up, holds him, hugs him, kisses the owie, and then they're squiggling out of their arms to go play again. And it's like this whole thing transpires in a matter of minutes. And we think, oh, it was so simple then. And we think, well, it's so complicated now.
Exactly. And
or is it, really so complicated?
Exactly. It really isn't. And that's actually where I came up with a big part of that quote came up with, to give people hope of the simplicity of being able to feel your pain, get comfort, go play. And also kind of like the assurance, if you feel your pain and you get proper comfort, you will automatically squirm down and go play. It's an automatic response, because a lot of people think, okay, great, I'm going to feel my pain, I'm going to get comfort. Now I got to figure out what I like to do for fun, and I've got to figure out how to play. But this is a natural byproduct of when our pain is comforted, it creates a space for play. It creates a space for peace, and being able to be able to recognize that it is a natural byproduct. Just like our triggers can be a knee-jerk reaction that causes us to have big feelings or big emotions. If we're in a habit of that process, because it's not just a one-time process, but if we're in a habit of feeling our pain, getting comfort, going and playing, feel your pain again, get comfort, go play. And if that becomes our knee-jerk reaction, we're always making space to be able to let go of our pain and be able to embrace play, which is really a byproduct of who we really are.
And something that really connects back to the first quote that we talked about, what you do matters, but you matter more. This whole world is very focused on what we do. So that's why there's so many self-help books that are centered on,
behavior modification. Yep.
Behavior modification, do this, some of them are cringeworthy now that I look at them. I'm like, oh my gosh, but play was similar to that, because I would hear people say, you just need to go do it. Just go start trying to do things. And I'm like, do you have any idea how terrifying that is to me, to just go start doing things?
No, it's terrifying, because your early childhood development programming says if you go play, you're going to be rejected. You're going to be abandoned.
Or something bad will happen.
Disconnected, or something bad will happen. And so for a person that has been programmed and wired in that way from early childhood development, that's like saying, go jump off a cliff. It's the same type of feeling that you're going to have. And people look at that and say, well, people that know how to play, because play was part of their early childhood development, go, play's so easy. Like, it's not a big deal. Why would it be scary? Why would it feel risky? But it feels risky when our brain says it has conclusions based on how our caregivers were able to be with us and play or not be with us and play.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. And very, very, very special to me, that statement, that quote of yours. So, yeah. All right. So next question is, in early childhood development, we need connection like we need food and water. Mm-hmm. Oh, that connects really well with the last one, really.
I use that a lot to be able to show people that in your early childhood development, how important connection is. Sometimes as adults, because we become, again, serious, over responsible, we're like, if we've got a roof over our head, if we've got food, if we have our basic needs met, then we're doing good. And that's how a lot of our parents raised us. And, when you talk about, did your parents provide for you? Most people are like, yeah, I had a roof over my head. I had food. I was provided for. But recognizing that the emotional provision is as important as the physical provision of food and water, and being able to see that in early childhood development, because we're, again, in that developmental stage, we need that to be able to develop correctly. Just like if you didn't get proper nutrition, you'd have malnutrition. Well, a lot of people have malnutrition emotionally because they didn't have connection during those formative years. It also connects with, we talked a lot about like what you do matters more than who you are. That's another big part of it, because when we were in our early childhood development, when we were good kids, we got connection. But when we were bad kids, we got disconnection. And recognizing the severity of that disconnection. I believe most of our trauma comes from the disconnection when we were behaving badly, that caused us to go into a starvation mode emotionally, and made us feel that franticness that we're now still feeling as adults when we're in a triggered state.
Something you just said, I've never heard you've probably said it and I just missed it, but the way you said it was really grabbed me: malnutrition emotionally. And for a lot of people from quote unquote, good homes, they would never allow them to even consider that potentially there was something that they didn't get, because they're like, hey, on paper, look, it's great. But nobody's home was perfect. Nobody's. And in some ways, every single human being, because we were raised by imperfect parents, we have areas of malnutrition emotionally. And maybe we had the 3 squares a day, and we had all the food and clothes and toys and all those other things. And we got to go participate in all the activities and all those other things. And we really didn't lack that way. But definitely, I would say that, everybody has faced the malnutrition emotionally.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why that quote
and
was
there's
so
no
important.
villains.
Yeah.
It's just because your parents didn't have it to give either.
It's just lack. And we can celebrate how they were able to tangibly and physically take care of us, because that's huge. That's also helped us to be more of our true selves and not be in wounds, but it's not enough. And when we say that it's enough, we're not taking into consideration that quote, that we need connection like we need food and water, and to be able to make that a priority, both to reparent, and then also, if you're still in a parenting stage, to be able to parent your kids with those emotional needs being met.
Well, I think a lot of children that had, let's say, they had the material things, in a lot of cases, it was probably their parents. They're like, they want to be good parents, quote unquote, because we're stuck in the knowledge of good and evil. So we're always trying to be good. So we will provide for those kids materially because we don't know how to give them, let's say, affection, or we don't know how to give them the other things. So we'll compensate because we'll give them what we know to give. And we can cook them a nice meal, which is great, which is good.
Yeah, exactly. Which is good. It's very good.
Yes.
If you're cooking your kids nice meals, that's great. But it's also showing you that you can have all the money in the world, all the resources in the world, but if you do not have that emotional connection, you're still going to feel poor.
And how wonderful that this can't be bought with money.
It actually is pretty precious. Yeah,
it is very
true.
precious, because there's absolutely nothing stopping any of us from receiving the healing.
Yeah.
And basically living from that healing and being able to share that with others, share connection with others.
Yeah. And that you could be raised in a poor home that's full of love and connection.
Absolutely.
And that child could be just as rich or richer than someone that has all
way
the financial
richer
provision.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is a huge blessing, because obviously how much money we have is oftentimes much out of our control. So
exactly. This is something that we are able to do once we recognize how important it is. And that's, again, why I use that quote, because we all recognize how important food and water is, but some of us don't realize how important connection is.
Yes, indeed. Well, we are at the end of our time, and we actually have a few more. This is exciting because we have a few more famous Laura Duncan quotes to go over. So that means we get to have a part 2. Isn't that exciting?
This is fun. Yeah, I like it.
So I'm going to save the wonderful conclusion that I typed up for the end of part 2. But to wrap up today, I just want to thank everybody for following along on this journey. And I really want to encourage people to ask questions. So I'm looking forward to that podcast session where we get to answer those questions. So please take the time to do that. If you have them, this is a great way to have your voice be heard and have us talk about something that's real relevant to you.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of questions. And when you ask the question, I'm going to be speaking directly to you. I'm not just answering a question for the question's sake. I'm answering a question because I know there's a person behind that question, probably multiple people behind that question, that you need to hear it. So it's going to be a hands-on answering questions, not just information.
And I have found from working with Laura for, I think it's almost 3 years now, that she thrives when people can ask her questions, which is why we have the whole podcast format the way that we do. You would not get all of Laura if she was just sitting here talking on a microphone to a camera all by herself.
Exactly. Yeah. Questions is where it's at. So please ask questions. I'd love to answer them.
Yeah. And it's been fun just to watch the amazing things that get pulled out of you as people ask questions. And when I was going to your workshops live, what I found that I would go to the same workshop over and over, and they'd be like completely different. They'd start off the same, but then after about 15 minutes, the first time you let anybody start asking questions, they went all different directions. but still about the same thing, which was cool. So it was, a lot of different ways to say the same thing, but even just little nuances of it. And, I'm sure there's a statistic somewhere how many times we have to hear anything to learn it. A lot of times we have to learn it different ways, experience it through the different senses, experience it through the different gifts. So thank you everyone for joining us. And we look forward to part 2 of famous Laura Duncan quotes.